Hello everyone, today we're going to go over some tanking tips that you can use for every single boss in Nighthold that you may not know about. So let's get right into it. This is going to help you tank a little bit better and help you determine what you should be using and when you should be using it. Now some of these things were briefly covered when I went over what type of damage you're taking, but I'm going to go into detail a little bit more here. For the first boss, Skorpyron, basically if you are the one tanking the boss, you are taking a lot of magic damage every single time the boss casts Arcano Slash. That is exclusively magic damage. So if you want to know when to cast your magic absorption spell, be it anti-magic shell, spell reflect, anything like that that'll help mitigate magic damage, right before he casts Arcano Slash is going to be the optimal time. For the second boss, Chronomatic Anomaly, the best time to pop your magic absorption is going to be as soon as the other tank taunts off of you. That means that you are going to be at your highest amount of magic debuff stacks, therefore you're going to be taking the highest amount of magic ticking damage at that time. For the third boss, Trilliax, what you need to make sure is that you tank the boss in the perimeter of the room. You do not want to tank him anywhere near the center, and actually nobody should be near the center just because you want to avoid dropping their arcane puddles in the center. The other thing is the magic damage here is being cast through his arcane slash, so if you want to know exactly when to pop your magic absorption, that's going to be on the second slash on each of the tank's phases. For the fourth boss, Spellblade Aluriel, when she casts Annihilation, something to note is that Annihilation is blockable by those tanking classes that do have a shield. Another thing that I do see a lot of tanks miss out on is during the arcane phase, when the orbs are about to start landing again and doing all of this big AoE damage. At that exact moment, she is also going to be casting a second Annihilate on a tank. Now if the tanks panic and try to move her too much, then she will for sure take down a tank. So what your tanks need to do during this exact phase is stay in position even though they're going to be taking bomb damage as well, and pop their biggest defensive cooldown and their magic absorption at the exact same time so that they survive both the Annihilate and the arcane bombs. The next boss is Krosus, and when you should really be using your magic absorption is basically as soon as the other tank taunts off of you. At this point you're going to be at the highest amount of stacks of the debuff, therefore you're going to be taking the highest amount of ticking damage from that magic debuff. With Star Augur, something that I do now that really helps me out is in phase 1, when you go in to get rid of your frost debuff, you actually get about 3 to 4 global cooldowns to hit Star Augur before you need to run out again before the next meteor hits you and you get the debuff again. So during these 3 or 4 global cooldowns, you should be generating as many of your resource as you can generate to make the next meteor not hit you as hard. So remember, you can stay in that group for 3 to 4 global cooldowns, make sure you get the biggest use out of them possible, generate your resource so that you can block the damage that's incoming. During phase 3, something I also don't see a lot of tanks do is the tank that has the boss and the tiny adds is actually going to be taking a stacking debuff that does add up pretty high. So what the tanks can actually do is swap between the big add and the boss so that those stacks fall off and your healers don't get overrun by damage. Up next, we have the Botanist, and the only real tanking tip that we can cover is that the damage that the off tank is taking is actually fully dependent on the amount of damage that the active tank is taking. So the off tank doesn't need to pop any active mitigation because the physical damage dealt to them is actually a proportion of the damage dealt to the active tank. Now they can do healing abilities and absorption effects, and those work just fine, but physical mitigation effects are not going to work on that debuff. So as an off tank, you can actually save your physical mitigation abilities for when you're an active tank, because as an off tank, they're not going to have effect. For Tichondrius, one of the things that does help out is the fact that the Nightborn elves are not affected by the vampiric aura. This means that as soon as the bloods go down, you can actually tank these Highborn elves right next to Tichondrius and cleave them down. Something else that I do see some tanks do is they actually keep tanking Tichondrius right next to him during the Echoes phase. Don't do that. Make sure you run behind a Spire. Moving on to Elisande. So what you can do with Elisande to maximize all of your DPS is stack the 2 adds and Elisande right on top of each other and cleave them down. However, as soon as the blue add does go down, you need to move the pink add out of the circle. While you can DPS them down together, you do not want them to die in the same spot. If they do, you get overlap circles, which is not a good time for anyone. So what you want to do is cleave them down and then separate both adds right before they die. This will help maximize your damage as well as get good positioning for your orbs. Also, during this encounter, if you're not actively tanking either the boss or an ad, what you should be doing to contribute to the group is actually soaking up the puddles. What this will do is it'll free up DPS and healers from doing that job themselves, since as a tank, your DPS is not going to be that monumental anyway. With Gul'dan, one constant thing to note is that the Fell Scythe ability is actually all magic damage, so you should be rotating your magic absorption for that to help out your healers a little bit. Something else to note, in phase 2, you can actually break empowered bonds yourself one time by using your extra action ability as a tank. And if you actually want to break empowered bonds twice, is pop your biggest tanking cooldown along with a magic absorption cooldown, and you should be able to break a second set of bonds. What this does is it allows the raid to focus more on freeing other people and getting right back to DPS because they now need to break out one less person. The last thing to note with Gul'dan is if you are not the active tank in phase 3, what you can do right after you pop a Fell Scythe is run into the Well of Souls and absorb 1 or 2 souls, run back to Gul'dan and continue popping Fell Scythe. This will help mitigate the soul damage amongst the group a little bit better, and since you have a larger effective health pool than anyone else there besides the other tank, this is actually better for you to be doing. Let me know if you guys have any extra tips or tricks in the comment section down below, but that does it for these tips and tricks. And as always, good luck tanking out there.